Hi, I'm Drew Halfmann from UC Davis Sociology, and I'm here with John Kincaid, also from UC Davis Sociology, a PhD candidate, a talented PhD candidate. So when I teach my social welfare class, I usually talk a little bit about the similarities and differences between the American and Swedish welfare states. And then I ask the students to break into groups and talk about, would they rather live in Sweden or in the United States? And so today I'm going to ask John to help me take on this question, and we'll feel how awful it is for the students, and go from there. So yeah, what about you? Would you?
All right. Wait, would I rather live in Sweden or the United States?
Yeah.
Well, I have big feet, and I do not think I could find wooden shoes in my size. So Sweden
is that even Sweden?
I don't know.
No, I think that's Holland.
Okay. Well,
okay.
So no. Well, theoretically, would I get to keep more of my own money if I worked in the United States?
Most likely. I mean, it depends on your income bracket. So I think if you're higher in the income bracket, you definitely would have a lower tax rate in the United States, and the services that you receive probably wouldn't make up for it. What's also kind of interesting is that a lot of people think that Sweden probably has a really progressive taxation system because they figure, oh, Sweden's so progressive in all these other areas. But actually their taxation system is fairly regressive. They let capitalists keep quite a lot of their own capital gains and things like that. And so really it is the broad middle, you might think it's, oh, Sweden, the rich must be funding this generous welfare state for the working class or whatever. It's really more of the middle class is paying for the middle class in a way, and the poor,
Well, isn't that one of the problems that we have with the U.S. welfare system is that where's this money going to come from? I mean, we talked about all of these generous welfare policies that people in Sweden get, but theoretically, if we try to do that for a population of 300 plus million in the United States, where's all that money going to come from? And you're saying that we would be paying for it ourselves, essentially.
That's right. Yeah, and you'd have to make a decision about whether it was worth it to you or not. Well, I mean, one question. So, what about this size question that you're saying? Oh, well, they can do it because they're small in a way, but we can't do it because we're big. So, why not? Why do you think that's important?
Well, the cost of services would go way up
higher.
For one, right? We have a pretty disparate, geographically spread out population, so the cost of getting them the services might be different.
Sure.
The types of services that people need might be more diverse in terms of education, healthcare, things like that. So having those centrally administered might cost more.
Got it. Yeah, and some people have argued too that. So people have made this sort of size argument in behalf of about Sweden. They've also sometimes made sort of a diversity argument, arguing that Sweden is quite a bit more homogeneous than the United States. And sort of as a political matter, people are more willing to fund services for people who they view to be like them. So, so that's about racial and ethnic diversity. It also might be about geographic diversity as well. So like people in Mississippi may not really want to fund people in California or something like that. So you could see the geographic disparateness being a problem in that respect as well. Okay, but you're dodging the question.
That's true. Well, I guess as a grad student,
yeah.
Well, on one hand, spending a year and a half with my 2-year-old, I don't know that I could do it without going crazy. So maybe 18 months or however, maybe 15 months home alone. Sounds nice, but I don't know if I could swing it.
I see.
But more seriously, the healthcare aspect, on one hand, right, not having to pay for that would be a pretty big expense. As a father of two, we spend quite a bit of money on things like that. And then on the same time, we lost quite a bit of money when one of us had to stay home with my daughter for the first year and a half of her life. Right? That was income that was out the door. And even though we're making a decent amount of money now, we're always still on the cusp of if one of us loses a job or doesn't have income, it's going to pretty radically change our lifestyle.
Okay.
So it would be a pretty big question.
And free higher education?
That would be a big one too.
Did you end up with student loans when you? Is that too personal?
It's a sore spot.
Okay, yeah. So these would be important issues as well.
Yeah, no, a lot of student loans.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know I don't know how to answer the question. I mean, I love living in the United States, and like we go to IKEA and we eat like Swedish food occasionally, and it's great for like just for occasionally. But I just this guy I know, Dan, he said that what he'd like to do is just stay in the United States, but have some of the Swedish programs, and that might be like
is that even feasible in the United States?
No, it's not feasible.
Isn't one of the questions here is the American public even going to be accepting of these type of programs in the United States? I mean, theoretically, we would have to vote these type of things in, and
That's right.
we don't have a great track record on voting for these type of social spending programs.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, something that I discuss in the course a lot is, we talk about sort of the political possibilities in the American political system and how things are, it's very difficult to get things enacted in our sort of fragmented political system, and also a system with, so much poverty and also so much racial and ethnic inequality. These are all barriers.
So it sounds like you're talking about two different aspects. On one hand, the political aspect, just in terms of the institution itself, with Congress and the presidency and the judicial system split, or
Right.
in the terms of the federal
Yeah.
system. But on the other hand, you're talking about the politics on the ground too, that might be a problem.
Yeah, some people have argued that Americans are just different. They have different sets of beliefs. They are more skeptical of the state. They're more suspicious of centralized authority. They're more individualistic, less communitarian. So, they may argue that there's, basically Swedish culture and American culture are so different that Americans would never, they would never agree to sort of a tax system that takes 50% of national income, whereas the U.S. takes like 17%. So, I mean, it'd be an enormous change.
So on one hand, my inclination to get free stuff tells me I want to go to Sweden.
Right.
But on the other hand, been told for years that when you get free stuff, you just don't want to work as hard. So where's the balance there? I mean, do we have any inclination, do we have any idea of what's happening in Sweden? Is this just a disincentive for people to work? Or if you're getting money for nothing, theoretically, shouldn't we see a lot of people in Sweden just doing nothing?
I guess so. There's this guy, Peter Lindert, in the economics department here at Davis, and he did a really interesting book where he compared sort of the economic performance of various welfare states. And he found that really the Swedish welfare state, it is a capitalist economy, but with a very large welfare state. And they've had very high levels of economic growth, and their welfare states hasn't seemed to impeded that growth in any way. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's another thing we talk about in the course is sort of this idea of a guaranteed basic income, which some European countries are playing around with that idea, and sort of this question of whether people would still work if they had some sort of guaranteed income. And I mean, my own response is I think that there would be, so on the margins, there would be some reduction in labor force participation, but not enough to destroy the economy or hurt economic growth substantially. And I think that most people would find these sort of basic services just not to be enough. They want more, and so would still work. That's my sense.
Is there any conversation around how the basic politics of the United States would change if we introduced welfare programs like this? Or is there something that we could study in terms of outcomes that may be different between the two countries? Like, would life as we know it be radically different if we started to introduce these type of programs in the U.S.?
Types of things. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of times when people talk about sort of the political possibilities here, they'll acknowledge that they're quite difficult, and then they'll talk about sort of like phasing things in the American context. So let's say you established a family allowance. You'd start out with it being very small. Or you establish paid family leave, you start out with it being brief, 6 months, something like that. And then it sort of ramps up over time. And so there's a way, so I guess I have two responses to the question. So one is that it probably would change society a lot, right? But maybe people might not exactly notice because it would be happening gradually. They would have time to acclimate to this new way of being. But for people who love the American culture and the way American does things, I could see that it might be threatening. They might, say that, inequality is part of what makes America great in a way, in that, it inspires people to excel, to strive, etc.
So maybe not inequality, but the reverse of that, the opportunity, right? The inequality is the flip side of the coin of the opportunity. So are there opportunity costs in Sweden? In other words, am I going to be able to get rich if I live in Sweden, or?
Oh yeah, totally. So this is the thing:
Okay.
You can totally get rich in Sweden, but but different. It is a little different. So as I said, capitalists are not taxed that heavily. So as a business person, I think you could get quite rich, but who doesn't do as well? They are highly paid professionals. So lawyers, doctors, maybe. Well, who else is highly paid?
PhDs.
PhD. Well, see, no, I was going to say that, but that's not true.
We're not going there.
No, we're just not that paid that well. But yeah, you could get rich as a capitalist, but as a high-paid wage earner, not so much, not so much. I knew this guy who was, worked in a large business, had a high salary, and he was a pilot. And, his big complaint is that in the United States, he would be able to buy his own plane. But in Sweden, that was not really feasible, given his very high level of taxation. And so, yeah, I think there are upper limits there that you wouldn't find here as much.
Well, maybe another question would be, how did we end up with this type of system, right? I mean, theoretically, if people can vote for free stuff, that's the critique of democracy, right? It's just going to eventually devolve into a system where people are going to vote in the people who are going to give them the most free stuff. Well, what happened to us? How come we haven't been voting for the people who are going to give us free things? I mean, is there some sort of political history that we could talk about that explains why it might be the case that the United States doesn't have this type of system?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's really a question for another day, I think. Yeah, I mean, one thing that strikes me is that we didn't really answer the question. And yeah, I mean, and so I guess, what I'd like people to take away from this is like, when a professor asks you to answer a stupid question like this, they don't really, or they shouldn't really care whether you answer the question. The point is to get you talking. And like we had an interesting conversation that gave me some things to think about, and that's what I think is the important thing. It's just a foil for trying to get a conversation started.
So if your answer was yes or no, then you weren't doing the exercise right. That's what you're saying.
Well, you should try and have an answer because, but I guess we're the professor and the student, we don't have to.